Chapter 4 The Tower 1. Eddie Dean was sitting in a chair. The chair was in a small white room. It was the only chair in the small white room. The small white room was crowded. The small white room was smoky. Eddie was in his underpants. Eddie wanted a cigarette. The other 7 men in the small white room were dressed. The other men were standing around him, enclosing him. 4 of them were smoking cigarettes. Eddie wanted to jitter and jive. Eddie wanted to hop and bop. Eddie sat still, relaxed, looking at the men around him with amused interest, as if he wasn't going crazy for a fix, as if he wasn't going crazy for simple claustrophobia. The other, in his mind, was the reason why. He had been terrified of the other at first. Now, he thanked God the other was there. The other might be sick, dying even, but there was enough steel left in his spine for him to have some left to loan this scared 21-year-old junkie. "That's a very interesting red mark you have on your chest," one of the customs men said. A cigarette hung from the corner of his mouth. There was a pack in his shirt pocket. Eddie felt as if he would take about 5 of the cigarettes in the pack, line his mouth with them from corner to corner, light them all, inhale deeply, and be easier in his mind. "It looks like a stripe. It looks like you had something taped there, Eddie, and all at once decided it would be a good idea to rip it off and get rid of it." "I picked up an allergy in the Bahamas," Eddie said. "I told you that. I mean, we've been through all of this several times. I'm trying to keep my sense of humor, but it's getting harder and harder all the time." "Fuck your sense of humor," another said savagely, and Eddie recognized that tone. It was the way himself sounded when he'd spent half a night in the cold waiting for the man, and the man did not come. Because these guys were junkies too. The only difference was guys like him and Henry were their junk. "What about that hole in your gut? Where'd that come from, Eddie? Publisher's Clearinghouse?" A third agent was pointing to the spot where Eddie had poked himself. It had finally stopped dribbling, but there was still a dark purple bubble there which looked more than ready to break open at the slightest urging. Eddie indicated to the red band where the tape had been. "It itches," he said. This was no lie. "I fell asleep on the plane. Check the stew if you don't believe me." "Why wouldn't we believe you, Eddie?" "I don't know," Eddie said. "Do you usually get big drug smugglers who snooze on their way in?" He paused, gave them a second to think about it, then held out his hands. Some of the nails were ragged, others were jagged. When you went cool turkey, he had discovered, your nails suddenly became your favorite munchies. "I've been pretty good about not scratching, but I must have dug myself a damn good one while I was sleeping." "Or while you were on the nod. That could be a needle mark." Eddie could see they both knew better. You shot yourself up that close to the solar plexus, which was the nervous system switchboard, you weren't ever going to shoot yourself up again. "Give me a break," Eddie said. "You were in my face so close up to look at my pupils I thought you were going to soul kiss me. You know I wasn't on the nod." The third customs agent looked with disgust. "For an innocent lambkins, you know an awful lot about dope, Eddie. What I didn't pick up myself on Miami Vice, I got from Reader's Digest. Now tell me the truth, how many times are we going to go through this?" A fourth agent held up a small plastic baggie. In it were several fibers. "These are filaments. We'll get lab confirmation, but we know what sort they are. They're filaments of strapping tape." "I didn't take a shower before I left the hotel," Eddie said for the 4th time. "I was out by the pool getting some sun, trying to get rid of the rash. The allergy rash. I fell asleep. I was damn lucky to make it to the plane at all. I had to run like hell. The wind was blowing. I don't know what got stuck to my skin and what didn't." Another reached out and ran a finger up the 3 inches of flesh from the inner bend of Eddie's left elbow. "And these aren't needle tracks?" Eddie shoved the hand away. "Mosquito bites, I told you. Almost healed. Jesus Christ, you can't see that for yourself?" They should. This deal hadn't come up overnight. Eddie had stopped arm popping a month ago. Henry couldn't have done that, and that was one of the reasons it had been Eddie. Had to be Eddie. When he absolutely had to fix, he had taken it very high up his left thigh, where his left testicle lay against the skin of his leg, as he had the other night when the sallow thing had finally brought him some stuff that was okay. Mostly he had just snorted, something which Henry no longer contented himself with. This caused feelings that he couldn't exactly define, a mixture of pride and shame. If they looked there, if they pushed his testicle aside, he could have some serious problems. A blood test could cause him problems even more serious, but that was one step further than they could go without some sort of evidence. The evidence they just didn't have. They knew everything, but they could prove nothing. All the difference between world and want, his dear old mother would have said. Mosquito bites. Yes. And the red marks an allergic reaction. Yes, I had it when I went to the Bahamas. It just wasn't that bad. He had it when he went down there, one of the men said to another. Uh-huh, the second one said. You believe it? Sure. You believe in Santa Claus? Sure. When I was a kid, I even had my picture taken with him once. He looked at Eddie. You got a picture of this famous red mark from before you took your little trip, Eddie? Eddie didn't reply. If you're clean, why won't you take the blood test? This was the first guy again, the guy with the cigarette in the corner of his mouth. It had almost burned down to the filter. Eddie was suddenly angry, white-hot angry. He listened inside. Okay, the voice responded at once, and Eddie felt more than agreement. He felt a kind of go-through-the-wall approval. It made him feel the way he felt when Henry hugged him, tousled his hair, punched him on the shoulder, and said, You done good, kid, and don't let it go through your head, but you done good. You know I'm clean. He stood up suddenly. So suddenly, they moved back. He looked at the smoker, who was closest to him. And I tell you something, babe, if you don't get that coffin nail out of my face, I'm going to knock it out. The guy recoiled. You guys have emptied the crap tank on the plane already. God, you've had enough times to been through it in 3 times. You've been through my stuff. I bent over and let one of you stick the world's longest finger up my ass. If a prostate check is an exam, that was a motherfucking safari. I was scared to look down. I thought I'd see the guy's fingernail sticking out of my cock. He glared around at them. You've been up my ass, you've been through my stuff, and I'm sitting here in a pet of jockeys with you guys blowing smoke in my face. You want a blood test? 'Kay, bring someone in to do it. They murmured, looked at each other, surprised, uneasy. But if you want to do it without a court order, Eddie said, whoever does it better bring in a lot of extra hypos and vials, because I'll be damned if I'm gonna piss alone. I want a federal marshal in here, and I want each of you to take the same goddamn test, and I want your names and IDs on each vial, and I want them to go into the federal marshal's custody. And whatever you test mine for, cocaine, heroin, Benny's pot, whatever, I want those same tests performed on the samples from you guys, and when I want the results turned over to my lawyer. Oh boy, your lawyer, one of them cried. That's what it always comes down to with you shitbags, doesn't it, Eddie? You'll hear from my lawyer. I'll sick my lawyer on you. That crap makes me want to puke. As a matter of fact, I don't currently have one, Eddie said, and this was the truth. I didn't think I needed one. You guys changed my mind. You got nothing because I have nothing. But the rock and roll just doesn't stop, does it? So you want me to dance? Great, I'll dance, but I'm not gonna do it alone. You guys are gonna have to dance too. There was a thick, difficult silence. I'd like you to take down your shorts again, please, Mr. Dean, one of them said. This guy was older. This guy looked like he was in charge of things. Eddie thought that maybe, just maybe, this guy had finally realized where the fresh tracks might be. Until now, they hadn't checked. His arms, his shoulders, his legs, but not there. They had been too sure they had a bust. I'm through taking things off, taking things down, and eating this shit, Eddie said. You get someone in here and we'll do a bunch of blood tests or I'm getting out. Now, which one do you want? That silence again. Where they started looking at each other, Eddie knew he had won. We won, he amended. What's your name, fella? Roland. Yours is Eddie. Eddie Dean. You listen good. Listen and watch. Give him his clothes, the older man said, disgustedly. He looked at Eddie. I don't know what you had or how you got rid of it, but I want you to know that we're going to find out. The old dude surveyed him. So there you sit. There you sit, almost grinning. What you say doesn't make me want to puke. What you are does. I make you want to puke? That's affirmative. Oh boy, Eddie said, I love it. I'm sitting here in a little room and I've got nothing on my butt but underwear, and there's 7 guys around me with guns on their hips, and I make you want to puke? Man, you've got a problem. Eddie took a step towards him. The custom guy held his ground for a moment, and then something in Eddie's eye, a crazy color that seemed half hazel, half blue, made him step back against his will. I'm not carrying! Eddie roared. Quit now, just let me alone! The silence again. The older man turned around and yelled at someone. Didn't you hear me? Get his clothes! And that was that. 2. You think you're being tailed? The cabbie asked. He sounded amused. Eddie turned forward. Why do you say that? You came looking out the back window. I never thought about being tailed, Eddie said. This was absolutely the truth. He had seen the tails the first time he looked around. Tails, not tail. He didn't have to keep looking around to confirm their presence. Outpatients from a sanitarium for the mentally retarded would have trouble losing Eddie's cab on this late May afternoon. Traffic on the LIE was sparse. I'm a student of traffic patterns, that's all. Oh, the cabbie said. In some circles, such an odd statement would have prompted questions, but in New York, cab drivers rarely question. Instead, they assert, usually in a grand manner. Most of these assertions begin with the phrase, this city, as if these words were a religious invocation preceding a sermon, which they usually were. Instead, this one said, because if you did think we were being tailed, we're not, I'd know. This city, Jesus, I've tailed plenty of people in my time. You'd be surprised how many people jump in my cab and say, follow that car. I know, it sounds like something you only hear in movies, right? Alright, but like they say, art imitates life and life imitates art. It really happens. And as for shaking a tail, it's easy if you know how to set up a guy. Eddie turned the cabbie down to a background drone, listening just enough so he could nod in the right places. When you thought about it, the cabbie's rap was actually quite amusing. One of the tails was a dark blue sedan. Eddie guessed that one belonged to custom. The other was a plain truck with Ginelli's Pizza written on the sides. There was also a picture of a pizza, only the pizza was a smiling boy's face, and the smiling boy was smacking his lips, and written under the picture was the slogan, it's a good pizza! Only some young urban artist with a spray can and a rudimentary sense of humor had drawn a line through pizza and had printed pussy above it. Ginelli. There was only one Ginelli Eddie knew. He ran a restaurant called Forefathers. The pizza business was a sideline, a guaranteed stiff, an accountant's angel, Ginelli and Balazar. They went together like hot dogs and mustard. According to the original plan, there was to have been a limo waiting outside the terminal, with a driver ready to whisk him away to Balazar's place of business, which was a midtown saloon. But of course, the original plan hadn't included 2 hours in a little room, 2 hours of steady questioning from one bunch of custom agents, while another bunch first drained and then raked the contents of Flight 901's waste tanks, looking for the big carry that they all suspected. The big carry that would be unflushable, undissolved. When he came out, there was no limo, of course. The driver would have his instructions. If the mule isn't out of the terminal 15 minutes or so after the rest of the passengers have come out, drive away fast. The limo driver would know better than to use the car's telephone, which was actually a radio that could easily be monitored. Balazar would call people, find out Eddie had struck trouble, and get ready for trouble of his own. Balazar might have recognized Eddie's steal, but that didn't change the fact that Eddie was a junkie. A junkie could not be relied upon to be a stand-up guy. This meant there was a possibility that the pizza truck just might pull up the lane next to the taxi, someone just might stick an automatic weapon out of the pizza truck's window, and then the back of the cab would become something that looked like a bloody cheese grater. Eddie would have been more worried about that if they had held him for 4 hours instead of 2, and seriously worried if it had been 6 hours instead of 4. But only 2. He thought Balazar would trust him to have hung onto his lips at least that long. He would want to know about his goods. The real reason Eddie kept looking back was the door. It fascinated him. As the customs agent half carried, half dragged him down the stairs to Kennedy's administration section, he had looked back over his shoulders, and there it had been, improbable but indubitable, irregularly real, floating along at a distance about 3 feet. He could see the waves rolling steadily in, crashing on the sand. He saw that the day over there was beginning to darken. The door was like one of those trick pictures with a hidden image in them, it seemed. You couldn't see that hidden part for the life of you at first, but once you had, you couldn't unsee it, no matter how hard you tried. It had disappeared on 2 occasions when the gunslinger went back without him, and that had been scary. Eddie had felt like a child whose nightlight had burned out. The first time had been during the customs interrogation. "I have to go." Roland's voice had cut cleanly through whatever question they were currently throwing at him. "I'll only be a few moments, don't be afraid." "Why?" Eddie asked. "Why do you have to go?" "What's wrong?" one of the custom guys had asked him. "All of a sudden you look scared." All of a sudden he had felt scared, but out of nothing this yo-yo would understand. He looked over his shoulder, and the customs men had also turned. They saw nothing but a blank wall, covered with white panels, drilled with holes to damp sound. Eddie saw the door, its usual 3 feet away. Now it was embedded in the room's wall, an escape hatch none of his interrogators could see. He saw more. He saw things come out of the waves, things that look like refugees from a horror movie where the effects are just a little more special than you want them to be, special enough so everything looks real. They looked like hideous crossbreeding of prawns, lobsters, and spider. They were making some weird sound. "You getting the Jim Jams?" one of the custom guys had asked. "Seeing a few bugs crawling down the wall, Eddie?" That was so close to the truth that Eddie had almost laughed. He understood why the man named Roland had to go back, though. Roland's mind was safe enough, at least for time being, but the creatures were moving towards his body, and Eddie had a suspicion that if Roland did not soon vacate it from the area it currently occupied, there might not be any body left to go back to. Suddenly, in his head, he heard David Lee Roth bawling, "Oh, I ain't got nobody." And this time, he did laugh. He couldn't help it. "What's so funny?" the customs agent who had wanted to know if he was seeing bugs asked him. "This whole situation," Eddie had responded. "Only in the sense of peculiar, not hilarious. I mean, if it was a movie, it would be more like a Fellini than a Woody Allen, if you get what I mean." "You'll be alright?" Roland asked. "Yeah, I'll be fine. TCB, man." "I don't understand." "Go take care of business." "Oh, alright. I'll not be long." And suddenly, that other had been gone. Simply gone. Like a wisp of smoke so thin that the slightest vagary of wind could blow it away. Eddie looked around, saw nothing but drilled white panels, no door, no ocean, no weird monstrosities, and he felt his gut begin to tighten. There was no question of believing it had been all a hallucination after all. The dope was gone, and that was all the proof Eddie needed. But Roland had helped somehow, made it easier. "You want me to hang a picture there?" one of the customs guys asked. "No," Eddie said, and blew out a sigh. "I want you to let me out of here." "Soon as you tell us what you did with the skag," another one said. "Or was it coke?" And so it started again. Round and round she goes, and where she stops nobody knows. 10 minutes later, 10 very long minutes later, Roland was suddenly back in his mind. 1 second gone, next second there. Eddie sensed he was deeply exhausted. "Taken care of?" he asked. "Yes. I'm sorry it took so long." A pause. "I had to crawl." Eddie looked around again. The doorway had returned, but now it offered a slightly different view of that world. And he realized that, as it moved with him here, it moved with Roland there. The thought made him shiver a little. It was like being tied to this other by some weird umbilicus. The gunslinger's body lay collapsed in front of it as before, but now he was looking down a long stretch of beach to the braided high tide line where monsters wandered about, growling and buzzing. Each time a wake broke, all of them raised their claws. They looked like the audience in those old documentary films where Hitler's speaking and everyone is throwing that old Sieg Heil salute like their lives depended on it, which they probably did when you thought about it. Eddie could see the tortured markings of the gunslinger's progress in the sand. As Eddie watched, one of the horrors reached up, lightning quick, and snared a seabird which happened to swoop too close to the beach. The thing fell to the sand in two bloody, spraying chunks. The parts were covered by the shelled horrors even before they had stopped twitching. A single white feather drifted up. A claw snatched it down. Holy Christ, Eddie thought, numbly. Look at those snappers. Why do you keep looking back there? The guy in charge had asked. From time to time I need an antidote, Eddie said. From what? Your face. 3. The cab driver dropped Eddie at the building in Co-op City, thanked him from the $1 tip, and drove off. Eddie just stood there for a moment, zipper bag in one hand, his jacket hooked over a finger of the other hand, and slung back over his shoulder. Here, he shared a 2-bedroom apartment with his brother. He stood for a moment looking up at it, in a monolith with all the styles and taste of a brick saltines box. The many windows made it look like a prison cell block to Eddie, and he found the view as depressing as Roland, the other, did amazing. Never, even as a child, did I see a building so high, Roland said. And there are so many of them. Yeah, Eddie agreed. We live like a bunch of ants in a hill. It may look good to you, but I tell you, Roland, it gets old. It gets old in a hurry. The blue car cruised by. The pizza truck turned in and approached. Eddie stiffened and felt Roland stiffen inside him. Maybe they intended to blow him away after all. The door? Roland asked. Shall we go through? Do you wish it? Eddie sensed Roland was ready for anything, but the voice was calm. Not yet, Eddie said. Could be they only want to talk, but be ready. He sensed that was a necessary thing to say. He sensed that Roland was readier to move and act in his deepest sleep than Eddie would ever be in his most wide-awake moment. The pizza truck, with the smiling kid on the side, closed in. The passenger window rolled down, and Eddie waited outside the entrance to his building, with his shadow trailing out long in front of him from the toes of his sneakers, waiting to see which would it be, a face or a gun. Thank you guys for sitting down with another part of Majin reading The Drawing of the Three. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I know I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger, but again, it's just for entertainment purposes. I hope nobody took offense to the fact that I made the cab driver Indian. I just really had no idea what voice to use. It's nothing intentional, no need to offend, no desire to offend anyone, so it was just a spur of the moment kind of thing. I hope nobody takes offense to that. With that being said, long days and pleasant nights, listener.